Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1 of The Boys. Like normally with this type of situation, I'm going to start off with a little bit of a non-spoiler, so to kind of give you my overall feelings of the season. I thought it was great. If you are all interested in superhero shows, you should watch this. Even if you're against superhero shows, you should watch this because it is not like any other superhero show. It is pretty violent and graphic. It's almost like not almost, it's literally the anti-superhero show. That's literally the antithesis of it. It's almost interesting because it's supposed, I guess you can, if you want to get all wordy about it, it's like deconstructing the superhero genre, but also I guess it's almost parodying, making a parody of it in certain regards, especially with some of the heroes you see. You kind of see like, oh, that character's kind of similar to this character, so on and so forth. It's very interesting. A lot, the characters are good. The story is very interesting. It takes you on a wild ride. I also said it is super, super violent. Things get bloody. It takes some turns I don't think you quite expect them to. Like, I wasn't really sure. Like, I went into this only knowing, because I've never read the comic book. Interestingly enough, was it Garth Ennis? He's the dude who wrote the comic book that this show is based on. He's also the one who wrote Preacher, which I guess you can kind of see certain similarities in certain regards, just like how wild and crazy the world is. So you can kind of see similarities in that regard. But nevertheless, other than that, it's just a really good time. Like, and the thing is, like, I think I was probably halfway expecting it to be more funnier than it is. It's funny, but it's a lot more of a serious show than I probably was going into it really thinking. But still, it is well worth your time. So if you have not seen it, I highly recommend you check it out. I guess that's really all I got to say. Like, going forward, I will be going into spoilers, so do keep that in mind. If you have not seen every episode of season 1, do not listen to this because I will be spoiling a lot of stuff. So you have been warned. Okay, so there's a lot to break down about this season. Let's first and foremost, like, obviously, like I said, I've never read the comic book that this is based on, but like, I got a feeling of what everything was about just on the solo, trailer that I saw. But obviously, there's so much more to it. Like, obviously, starting off with like, Huey and Robin and that whole A-Train situation, and the fact is they slow it down and they turn a camera. Pools of blood, you see like bones and stuff there. It's like, Jesus. And he's holding on to Robin's hands. It's like, Jesus, that's super morbid and crazy. And it's like, okay, so obviously you're setting up that's what this whole squad is about, putting supers in their place. Because there's even we end up seeing it a little bit later on. I forgot what it's exactly called, but it's a group put together for those who are collateral damage when it's stuff related to superheroes. It's like, oh my God, that's brutal. It's so interesting because, like, I like the mirror that this show puts up, because the show basically shows you it's kind of like, oh, superheroes aren't that great, especially because like superheroism is kind of like monetized in this. It's literally a corporation, VOD, like, oh, the fact of the matter is everything that you say is a written speech. Because like, even with other superhero shows, you never see that angle of things. I don't think a lot of superhero stuff is treated like that. I'm not saying there isn't stuff treated like that, but for like superheroism to be like a revenue avenue of like, writers and publicists, it's just so interesting. This see a world where like superheroes is just an established thing, and that's how it kind of potentially could be run, because especially, compared to like Marvel or DC stuff, that's not really the case. Superheroes kind of really do their own thing. In this case, they can't. They're like bound by contracts and stuff like that. It's wild and crazy to think about that. It's actually kind of interesting because, like, obviously you get Huey's side of things of like, okay, here are these humans who are affected, just regular folk who are affected by superheroes, kind of pointing superheroes as villains. But then you even get someone like Annie, Starlight. Her storyline kind of shows you the behind the scenes of heroism and just showing you like, oh, it's kind of shitty and scummy and disgusting. And it's like, it's so interesting because they're both kind of, their stories are parallel to each other in that regard, because obviously Andy has more hope for it. It's like, oh, she always wanted to be a superhero because she's literally one of the few people throughout the entire show that wants to do it to save people. She wants the best of, has the best of intentions. Some superheroes ended up sadly losing it in a way, once, corporations got involved, it kind of, or rather one particular corporation got involved, it kind of took away the good nature of being a superhero. It was literally, being a superhero is a business. People literally have jobs related to you being a superhero. Like I said, being writers and publicists and all that stuff, how people market you, it's crazy. Kind of knowing, because I was wondering, like, okay, for part of my, like, I guess because of the trailer, I was under the assumption maybe the 7 were the only ones. It's like, no, like, Vault has like over 200 superheroes worldwide, and it's so interesting they pick and choose, like, oh yeah, you can go to this particular city because this city needs a superhero, but the 7 are like the big ones, you know. So that was just kind of interesting to see things kind of broken down like that, to understand like wherever, cause it's interesting because we never got 100% understanding where everyone came from. Like, we ultimately end up finding out like where Butcher comes from and all of this, everything related to Becca, and you know, that's his main motivation in all this. But like, you know, like what his big motivation was, because all you have is Butcher being like, we all have a reason for being here with this, you know. Frenchie, his situation is kind of his, you know, but still. And then Kimiko, which they just kind of refer to as the female for a long time, but we'll just, you know, go ahead and call her Kimiko. Interesting enough, I didn't realize this until I looked at her credits. I'm blanking on the actress's first name, but I think her last name is Fukuhara. She was, I'm blanking. I believe, yeah, she was Katana in the Suicide Squad movie. I was like, oh, because I didn't remember ever seeing Katana without her mask on in the movie. I feel like I might have seen her when she was doing, press junkets and stuff like that for Suicide Squad, but regardless, I should also talk about it too, like the actor who plays was it Laz Alonso, like multitude of things you've seen him in, but the thing I'm kind of best known for is Breakout Kings, that TV show. Kind of same thing for Carl Urban. I can't pinpoint multiple things, like he's been in so many different things, but the thing I kind of best know him for is kind of hard to say, because he's just been in a multitude of things. He's just one of those dudes like, oh, I've seen Carl Urban in a shit ton of stuff, you know. So there's that. What was also interesting to me was finding out the actress who plays Annie, why I recognized her. Her name's Erin Moriarty. She was Hope in season 1 of Jessica Jones. Interestingly enough, her publisher or whatever, Ashley, she was also an actor who was also in season 1 of Jessica Jones. She was one of the tenants in the building that Jessica works out of. So I just tip it. I could have sworn there was another person too. I'm blanking on who, but I think there was another person from Jessica Jones also in this. But regardless, so that was kind of me getting caught up in the whole acting thing. Obviously there's others, because it's like Anthony Starr, best known for like Banshee, is kind of what I know him best for, being Homelander. I'm trying to feel like, was there anyone else amongst them I knew? I know a little bit about Elizabeth Shue, who played Madeline. Other than that, I'm trying to think. I don't think there was anyone else I really knew. I feel like the actress who plays Queen Maeve, I have to look that up. I forgot to look it up, but I feel like I've seen her in something. I just can't quite place it. Nevertheless, that's me getting all caught up in the acting thing. I need to kind of move past that. So regardless, anyway. But I mean, really kind of breaking things down, I thought it was so interesting how this started off as a revenge story, and it kind of pretty much stays a revenge story the entire story, but then there's the added bonus of like, oh no, there's a conspiracy, because at first it's like, okay, so what was A-Train up to? He was like, oh, he was stopping a robbery or something like that, but it's like, no, there were no robberies at the time, so like, what the hell was he up to? There's his girlfriend, what was it, Popclaw, her whole situation, which I was kind of twisted. Like, she ended up taking the Compound V, she was on top of the dude's face and his head exploded like that, and that was gnarly. But everything that kind of happens, it's kind of sad too, because A-Train kind of blames Huey later on, but it's like, that was on you, you know. Because I was actually shocked he didn't kill her sooner. But to be fair, she never gave up the information, and he knew she was lying. I was actually kind of surprised. I thought when he was like, come on, so tell me the truth, you know, all that we've been through, remembering our first date and stuff like that. I think that was like the first conversation. But then like, no, that was more so about like her, you know, him being there helping her get off drugs. So like the whole first date situation was the second conversation much later on. But like, the first time through, I thought she would have given it up, but it's not till the second time through. And then sadly, like, he uses his power and puts needles in her arms and make it look like she overdosed. I'm like, Jesus, dude, that's rough. I love the whole situation too. Like, I'm going to be all over the place with this, so I do apologize. It's just how everything's come to my head. And Frenchie's relationship, and just like the fact that they butt heads a lot, just because like I love, like, you have Butcher lying, they're like, oh yeah, I haven't seen Frenchie in years, which is like, you're so full of crap. And then, you know, bringing those two together, and they kind of want to kill each other because of the Mallory thing, which we'll get to soon enough. But then, you know, I love later on when they're kind of like getting pissy with each other and they're about to walk away. Butcher makes reference to the Spice Girls. It's like, oh, by themselves they're kind of nothing, but when they come together, they're the goddamn fucking Spice Girls. And then MM's like, why do you know so much about the Spice Girls? He kind of doesn't answer, but later on it seems like because Becca would hum it all the time, that's why he knows so much about the Spice Girls. But it's like, come on, we can do this. Alone, we can't do this, but together, you know, we're just, once again, we're the Spice Girls and whatnot. And I love it being like, man, he's really terrible at speeches, and Frenchie is like, yeah, he really, really is. So I love that they could bond over that. So other than that, I like what they did with Huey's character, because Huey was so conflicted. It's so interesting because you kind of have that moment, that hyperventilating moment throughout, like every time, like it almost seemed like after he kind of hyperventilates, he kind of shifts everything, because at first it's like he's passing out and stuff like that just because reliving everything, you know, because he tried to get justice for Robin, but they're trying to like, yeah, you need to sign like a, you know, here an NDA, you'll get 45,000. It's like, that's all her life was worth. You know, you have A-Train making apologies, but he never actually apologized. I even love that inside of his head, Huey was like, you never actually said you were sorry. That's all, at the very least, I would want, you know, so. But I think that was kind of like his thing of like, he was very passive rather than kind of, and I guess that's kind of part of his growth over the course of the season, is the fact is that he is more, hey, I'm going to take charge and do what I got to do, like, take action. He was never the kind of take action guy who's just kind of like he kind of mulls it over in his head type of person. So even his dad was telling me, it's like, no, give up on this whole situation. I'm not a fighter, you're not a fighter. It's like, geez, Dad, you see how like messed up this situation is. Interestingly enough, his dad played by Simon Pegg. I thought that was kind of interesting. But it's like, oh, okay, so even your own dad's not on your side with this whole fight, because it makes sense. It's, I mean, superheroes are celebrities in this world, and it's like, you know, you're not going to win in a fight with, you know, someone of this magnitude and power who literally has a corporation backing them too. It's like, it's kind of a lost cause type of thing, but for him, he didn't want to give up, and that's actually what brought, you know, Butcher to him in the first place, because he found a kindred spirit. It's like, you've been through what I've been through. Their whole fight with, what's his face? Translucent. That was interesting. I also love that he's a pervert. Like, basically, to use his power, he has to get super naked just because of the way his skin is. It allows him, you know, to get, you know, makes him translucent. But also, what was interesting, too, is, like, he has thick skin. His skin is like diamond, which that's kind of an interesting thing too, that Frenchie brought up. The fact of the matter is the complicated thing about killing a super, like you could literally count, he's like, you can count on one hand how many supers die, because they all have these different abilities, and each one's kind of also got their weaknesses, so you have to find the right thing to kind of end up working in your favor to help take them down. In the case of Translucent, it took him watching a documentary or whatever about turtles to make him go, that's what it is. Your hard exterior, your skin is your shell, but on the inside, you're just like any other person. Hence why they stuck C4 up his ass. That was interesting. I was like, they're like, if you even pick at it, it'll explode. I got this trigger here, it'll explode. So that was interesting. But like I said too, Huey wasn't down for this whole situation. I mean, granted, there's a whole thing of like them fighting him. And I love when they were fighting him. Butcher spits on him, spits blood on him so he can see him. And it's like bam, 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 bam. And that was pretty dope. And even like the whole point of like, oh, I'm about to electrocute him with the cord with Huey, but like it was too short, so Butcher ended up pushing him back, and it seemed like he got electrocuted in the ass if you kind of see the outlining. So it's like, oh, is he dead? Turns out he's not dead. So I also thought it was kind of interesting too. We never saw Sherry for the rest of the season. I'm just thinking about that, which I guess that would complicate things, especially because it seems like obviously like Kimiko, and like obviously we'll get to that later on, but Kimiko and Frenchie kind of developed something. I'm sure having Cherry around would kind of complicate that, but that could be something for the future. But nevertheless, like I said, it seems so interesting because we got, like I said, this point of view of superheroes being evil, and like and it's so interesting too because we, like I said, the parallels of like, oh, here's Huey joining the group, eventually, you know, the boys, and then you have, you know, Annie, aka Starlight, you know, rising up and joining the Seven and whatnot, like the audition tapes and stuff she has to go through. It's like, that's nuts. It's almost like she won a singing competition, like American Idol or something like that, the way her mom was reacting about it. I mean, it's a big thing. Obviously, once again, it's not all that's crapped up to be, like the whole deep situation, him being a piece of shit. Sad thing is, even Maeve being like, oh my God, Christ, girl, get yourself together. Don't let them see you like this. It's like, wow, you couldn't be supportive. She probably knew at that time what had happened, but, you know, she herself had become very jaded because of this situation, because, you know, she kind of talks about it later on, but looking at her like that, you know, probably reminded Maeve of who she was. And that's so interesting too, because like Maeve is the only one who kind of steered away from being crappy to a certain extent. That Flight 37 situation was nuts. It's like, oh, we're here to save the day, yay. It's like, well, the plane's gonna go down. Maybe we should probably get out of here. It's like, wait, what? At the very least, Maeve wanted to save the mother and child. I was like, are you gonna do that? And it's like, okay, I was like, are you gonna at least save the child? And the mother's like, at least take my daughter. And they don't. I'm like, Jesus, that was 123 people. I was like, that's the dark side to superheroism, because it's like, well, it's kind of a lost cause. Because I thought it was kind of interesting, his justification for it too. It's like, oh, you want me to stop the plane? But he's like, there's no ground for me. I guess because his super strength he won't have the traction needed to like hold the plane up or stop it, because there's no ground to kind of, you know, I'm sure there's a scientific explanation, but I can kind of get behind why he said he couldn't do it, because it's like, my powers don't work in that regard. I would need ground beneath me to kind of stand on to kind of hold it back. But regardless, it's like, holy crap. And then Homelander later on spins it of like, this tragedy, it didn't have to happen, but the government, they don't want us to be part of like the, you know, the national defense and stuff like that, which that's also an interesting thing of like, okay, because they're trying to weaponize superheroes. Like, well, they're hearing stuff, trying to get them pushed into being part of the national defense, which brings up this whole argument of like, well, if you do that, other countries are going to strike back immediately with nukes if we're sending superheroes in to do the job, you know? So I just thought that was kind of fascinating. And obviously, like I said, everyone's got these personas up of like, you know, Homelander. It's kind of interesting too, because it almost seemed like at the beginning, like I was like, oh, maybe Butcher doesn't know about Homelander's bad nature or something like that, because he's like, oh yeah, the dude's squeaky clean, but it's like, looking back, you know, once you find out everything later on, you're like, oh, you already knew, but you probably didn't want to tell too much because that was your personal story and you don't want to kind of share that with anyone. Regardless, for him to just kind of seem like he's the pillar of the group and that he is kind of the good guy, for him to really step into that old kind of borderline evil Superman situation when that guy was trying to basically blackmail her, and it's like, oh, he's like, I overheard everything, and then later on you get the context of why he was, because he's obsessed with Madeline, and to the point that he's spying on her through one particular part of the wall. It's like, what makes it even, because I was like, oh, he's just standing there looking at himself in that picture when and he walks by. I was like, oh, but maybe he's reflecting on who he used to be. It's actually kind of interesting. Just like a little tidbit of information is the fact is he gave up his secret identity a long time ago. I guess most of the seven did, except for Black Noir. He's the only one that you wouldn't recognize. But yeah, I just thought that was kind of fascinating. Also, like, you know, really quickly, like Annie's whole situation, I'm like, oh, I'm up here doing my superhero thing. This girl was about to get raped, so what did I do? I stepped in, saved the day, but someone recorded video, so it looks like I'm just beating on random dudes, and she got grilled out for it. Like, how could you do this? Why don't you get the woman's name beforehand and stuff like that? It's like, that's kind of not how this thing works, but it's like, oh, this is actually how it works. It's just, like I said, it gets a little disparaging in her regards. Like I said, she comes in like the hopeful, bright, you know, young whippersnapper of like, yeah, I'm gonna be a superhero, I'm gonna save the world. It's like, no. She even talks about it later on, and I thought was kind of a beautiful line that encapsulated it all. It's like, I don't think they want you to be a superhero. I think they just want you to look like one. And it's like, I thought that was such a nice way to kind of like sum that all up, you know? So, but circling back, because like I said, I'm getting lost in everything. I love the whole idea of like compound V, the whole thing of like, oh no, like superheroes are juicing, there's literal steroids for superheroes. That's interesting. And then it seems like, okay, A-Train's connected to this, and so is Ezekiel, who is like this super religious, essentially almost like this borderline super religious Mr. Fantastic without the smarts and stuff like that, who's super against like he's super anti-gay, but he's also gay, so it's just, you know, the messed up hypocrisy of like, don't do that, you know, of like that was, and that he ends up getting blackmailed for it. And I even love Huey being like, also cut back on the whole anti-gay stuff, like kind of basically like, that's not cool, you know. So it's kind of sad too, like what is meant, this season meant for like Huey and, you know, like I said, I'm all over the place, but Huey and Annie's relationship of like him kind of having to use her for the sake of the group, but at the same time falling for her because like obviously like it's still kind of fresh off of losing Robin and stuff, and so his motivation is revenge. So at points he kind of feels bad about using her, but then he sees Robin, and I think it's kind of a combination of his guilt because like no, I'm supposed to be doing this for your sake, but I'm here chatting it up, being happy with her. She's a super's killed you. Like a lot of like Butcher's like hate for supers was kind of wearing on him, being like, this is the mission, this is about taking down A Train, nothing else mattered, no one else mattered. Even the whole point that Mother's Milk tried to like bring to him, being like, there's going to be a price to pay for it. And at first he thought, hey, I'm willing to pay that price, whatever price it is needed to be paid, I will pay it, just because he was so dead set on revenge, heavily making him much like Butcher. I even like that scene because there's so much weight to it, and when he chews out when Butcher and Huey are at that meeting for people who are collateral damage, and it's like he snapped at everyone because it's like, oh, you're around here sharing your feelings and stuff like that. What if for you example is like, oh, the whole spine thing is like, what if the hero did that on purpose? Like what if we're just toys to them, they enjoy hurting us? Did you even think about that? You're all scared little rabbits. It was interesting also to hear from Seth, who was played by Malcolm Barrett. I thought that was kind of neat, of like he was with someone, a superhero. She had ice powers. When she climaxed, she froze. His dick was still inside of her, and it basically was like negative like 300 and something degrees. It was essentially like sticking your penis in liquid nitrogen, and it snapped off. It's like, oh my god. Interesting enough, that had to be like a little wink and nod that two of the writers, the ones that were at the very least were working for Annie at one point. One was named Seth. That's the one that was played by Malcolm Barrett, which also once again just the ties because he was in Preacher, but one of them was also named Evan, which Seth Rogen and Evan, was it Goldberg, are executive producers on this. Also once again kind of connected to Preacher as well. So it's just kind of fascinating. I was like, is that supposed to be that? Also, you had actors popping because there was a convention at one point in time where actors were there at the conventions. Just like Tara Reid, I saw Billy Zane playing himself. He pops up in 2 episodes. In one episode, one of Pal Claw's movie, he was in the scene that I was like, Billy Zane? What? That's so dope. I even love it later on when like they're at the convention, you see that like a husband and wife or whatever, or boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever the case may be, are hugging Billy Zane for a photo or whatever, and then the boyfriend kind of gets a little too cozy. You almost have Billy Zane looking like, what the hell? What are you doing? I love that. But and also you had Seth Green actually pop up in it too, because he's working with Black Noir. It's like, oh, we're actually going to start a Vault Cinematic Universe, the VCU. At that moment I screamed out. I was like, fuck you, Seth. I just thought that was like the funniest fucking thing that they did that. I don't know why, it just got me. I was like, fuck you, Seth, for being a part of that joke or whatever. That's so good. The VCU, I love it. Because of course, I love that, because obviously I just like that, they don't shy away from making those references, even like making comparisons. Like, yeah, there was, it's just interesting to me how it all kind of plays out like that. Regardless, getting back to the point I was trying to make. First and foremost, like I said, the whole A-Train situation, how that ties into Kimiko, her whole situation of like her being wild and kind of crazy like that. I love it. I was like, I thought, like, because I assumed everyone that was a part of the boys was a normal human. Like, I didn't think any of them had superpowers. I kind of thought that was the whole point. But then like Kimiko was like, oh wait, she has powers. And then, because at first it's like, oh, she's some girl that's locked up or whatever. I'm like, okay. Because at first my thought was like, oh, they were what they used, what is it, Compound V. I thought it was from her blood. I thought that's how they got it, but no, they were injecting her with it. We'll kind of get to that soon enough. But she's kind of wild and kind of feral, literally ripping people. Like, she punched that dude's chest or stomach in with her fist. She was literally punching inside of him, clawed at that one dude's face. It was brutal. Hell, that one dude shot himself just so he wouldn't have to deal with her. Pretty gnarly. And what I really appreciate too, like I said, was like the relationship she has with Frenchie, that he was able to kind of talk to her. Because Frenchie, throughout the course of the season, talks a little bit about his personal life, kind of stuff relating to his dad. For the fact is, it's like, oh yeah, my dad was bipolar. He literally tried to suffocate me with like a Hello Kitty bouvet or something like that, he was saying. But later on, he bonds with Kimiko because it's like, oh, you want to go home? He's like, I get it. my dad kidnapped me from my mom for years, and he'd say he loves me and we do all this stuff, but then he'd hurt him, and he'd try to run away, but every time he ran away, his dad would ultimately find him. And it's like, and that's what they kind of bonded on, like, amongst anyone. And I thought it was kind of interesting. Part of me wonders, did she kind of do that? Because she kind of like straightens out her hair. She even puts on fingernail polish. That's why I'm kind of like, is there, kind of doesn't seem like a friendship, because out of anyone, she's closest with Frenchie in the group. And so she cares about him the most. So I'm wondering, is that going to develop into something? You know, because it's interesting, because there's a whole conversation MM and Frenchie have about relationships, because I love, like, oh right, because they first bust MM's balls about the whole, like, he's like, I love you too, baby, and he does the whole through the phone, and everyone starts busting out laughing except for Huey, and he's like, oh, you guys can go fuck yourself, which to me, I'm like, oh, that's so awkward, because I was like that at one point in my, which I did it as a teenager, you know, literally the Soulja Boy song Kiss Me Through the Phone featuring Sammy kind of resonated with me. That was literally like one of the reasons why I started doing that, was because of that song. It's a whole thing. I was a weirdo. It's just a funny thing, just because I'm like, I've done that myself. It's like, oh man. But yeah, like, he's all about relationships and stuff like that, but it's kind of a complicated thing. Being, you know, bound by one person is kind of what, you know, Frenchie was talking about, which is so interesting, because it seems like he might have found that something special potentially with Kimiko, but it seems like he's kind of like, oh, like, I'm with a different beautiful person all the time. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Some other stuff to break down. It was interesting what they did with Deep, because he's kind of like treated as kind of like, oh, he's this useless, you know, kind of like, he represents the Aquaman of this, because everyone's like, oh, Aquaman, he's so lame, and he basically is the bottom of the barrel. And to see where his story takes him, when he tried to rescue that dolphin, it literally, he stops, it flies out the car, lands on the street. I'm like, maybe you can, and then an 18-wheeler comes by and kills him. I'm like, oh my god, that sucks, dude. It's like, you try to do the right thing, it's like, oh yeah, you try to help, you know, but it ended up blowing up in your face. And it just, you know, obviously, you know, Annie later on kind of speaks her truth about, you know, what he did, and he has to apologize and everything. And there's parallels to real life, because you see, like, literally him making the apology video, because obviously, like, there's a whole team behind it and everything. It kind of makes it disgusting, because it's like, oh no, all right, let me do this again. He has to do multiple takes on his apology, which is like a half-assed apology, because he's like, oh, the mistake, you know, I misconstrued the signs or whatever. It's like, don't give me that bullshit, you know. It's just crazy. And like I said, it's parallels to real life, of like, oh yeah, like, some probably apology videos about mistakes that were made were probably like that, where there's literally a marketing team being like, and here's the script and rolling, never mind, we'll do that again, take two. You know, it being a machine, that adds this disgusting level to the whole superhero thing, of like, that everything, you know, because even that point when Deep and Annie went out to save the day, it's like, oh yeah, cameras were immediately in her face, and it's like, okay, go over to those guys and say this one-liner. Then they like design her costume and everything. She's like, I don't want to do that, but then like, you have to be like, but then like, Madeline kind of sets the record straight. It's like, oh, it's kind of a give and take relationship. You kind of have to do this, or basically you get lost. It's like, holy crap, you know? Which those writers, like I said, Seth and Evan, were so good at being like, oh, like, coming up with her backstory, creating this narrative for her story, you know, her debut as this, you know, a new hero, part of the Seven and whatnot. But also kind of showing you how, like, little bit, like I said, over the course of the season, it's like little things here and there. Like, you know, even before the plane thing, there was that whole thing with the shooter where Maeve was like, I was supposed to handle this, but Homelander came over and he punched him in the chest. And he's just kind of like, almost like ill, gross, after he pulled his hand out, he's wiping it on a dead dude's body. It's like, all right, but you know what we're going to have to do? Maeve, stand over there, I'm going to fire some bullets. Obviously, he gave you no choice. You had to take him down. What's also interesting, just kind of the difference in superheroes and stuff like that. Homelander is able to fly up to, like, what was it, like the 30-something floor, and you have Maeve being like, where's the elevator? It's just so interesting to me. Did they ever specify exactly what Butcher ever was? Because he told Huey that it's like, oh, I was technically kind of an FBI agent. He obviously has government ties, because he knows Susan, played by Jennifer Esposito, ton of things, but which I was like, oh, is she with the FBI? I was like, nope, CIA. You definitely got friends in high places. But obviously she has her issues with the way Butcher handles things. But obviously, like, we get flashbacks showing that he wasn't always like that. Interestingly enough, his wife is played by Chantel. I'm going to butcher her last name. Was it Van Satin or Staten? It's something like that. God, she's popped up in so much stuff. I'm trying to remember. I think Shooter's the most recent thing she's done. I know she was in The Flash back in the day. I think it was like season 2, so it's been a long time, but still. It's actually super tragic when you find out like the backstory of like, oh, why he has such an issue with in particular his issue is with Homelander, and it's like, okay, finding out what that issue is, which obviously we'll elaborate on that much later on after we kind of run through everything else. I talked about it earlier, like the whole like, oh yeah, it gets bloody. There is a lot of heat vision slicing people to pieces throughout this. That's kind of like Homelander's big thing, which is like slicing through people. It's like, oh my god, even to the point like when he was helping the army guys later on, like, and like I said, he just looks so evil because he's enjoying it. And there's that dude running and he lasers the dude, and it's like even the army guys are like, oh Jesus, like he was a bad guy, sure, but go that far, jeez. I talked about it earlier, literally just a little bit ago, about the whole reason why, like, being interesting, like how we saw that Butcher wasn't always the way he is now. It actually seems like Mallory made him into that. She forged him into this weapon. She's the one that set him on this path going after Homelander. It's like, oh, obviously, like, Becca went to this office. She didn't come out 3 hours later. So it's like Homelander must have made some advances on her, sexually assaulted her, and, then like she was sitting at a bench for a couple hours, like 3 hours, she didn't move a muscle, and then she disappeared, and she hasn't been seen in those past 8 years. But Mallory's the one that set him on that path. That's actually what led to some contention between this group, why they kind of broke up last time, is everything related to Mallory. Basically, they were going after this particular superhero, was it Lamplighter? He ended up killing Mallory's grandchildren because, essentially you had MM saying it was on Frenchie because he wasn't keeping his eye. He didn't go along with the plan, hence the whole chemical thing. It's like, oh, we should go with the plan, but he kept not going with it because he thought he could reach chemical, which ultimately he did, but still. I kind of left this off earlier, but kind of circling back to Deep, for him to like obviously get outed from the 7 and kind of sent to, what was it, he got sent to like Ohio or something like that, and he's kind of working there, him trying to save that lobster. He's like, oh, give me that one. He's like, no, and he ends up killing him. The dude getting him the lobster ends up dying. It's like even the smallest things he can't do, to the point he kind of breaks down. The last time we see him, he shaves off his head and his body hair. Also, that scene was kind of disgusting and crazy, like the whole like scene with the woman. I guess it's supposed to be kind of reflective of like, showing what he did to Annie, I guess is what that's supposed to be, but that was kind of like, whoa. Also finding out he's got gills on his side, but on his stomach and chest or whatever, and like the girl fingering them while she's touching herself, it's like, whoa, that's a new level of gnarly. But I think finding out, like, okay, the whole contract goes through later on. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of stuff I'll get to. But then, like, for him to kind of find out, like, oh, I'm not a part of it. I'm still being sidelined. Because it's like, oh, he kind of treated himself like he was so important. Like, oh, yeah, like, oh, man, I'm going to lead my own unit and stuff like that. And to kind of find out, I guess it makes him kind of lose his value in himself. And he's just standing there looking at himself in the mirror. That's, like, the last time we see, like... I mean, it's a good fall from grace in the sense of he needed to fall from grace because he was like hoity-toity, acting like he was number 2. Because even Annie called him out. It's like, oh, you're not number 2. You're literally bottom of the barrel. And it's like, if you ever come near me again, what'd she say? Like, I think she said she'll burn his eyes out or something like that. I like how her powers represented, just like when she kind of like gets into it, like her eyes glow yellow like that. I think it's pretty dope. But like kind of going with the, with everything of like going with the compound V and, how that ultimately ties into everyone's story. I'm curious how many people actually know 100% of the truth about that whole situation. There's a whole situation like Annie might be one of the few who knows. I know Homelander does. I don't know if anyone else in general knows. Like he's at the top of the barrel, so he has a good enough idea, but I don't know about anyone else. Because the conversation never came up with any other heroes. So I don't know, maybe Maeve knew, maybe she didn't. Which there's a whole complicated thing about her relationship. I chalk that up to be like, oh, her relationship didn't work out because basically, like, we know that her and Homelander were a couple, I'm thinking that was more so probably like an orchestrated thing of like, oh, we need to put you together because you two, Maeve and Homelander together. Oh my God, they're the power couple. I'm assuming it was that type of thing because she has a girlfriend. I mean, doesn't mean she couldn't just be bisexual, but it didn't seem like she was really all that interested in Homelander. So that's why I'm kind of like, especially because I think she saw kind of like how much of a douchebag he could be. Especially because it seems like he has some major, like, complicated mommy issues. We'll get to that eventually. But, yeah, kind of circling back to what I was, saying was because it's actually kind of sad because Annie the entire time she has to deal with, like, okay, her mom at that, church thing was kind of like, oh, my friends are going to be watching, so please, it's like, what? This isn't about you. But she even was like, but isn't it about me? All that I've sacrificed getting you to all those pageants, which was also super pageants, which interesting. But it's so interesting when you kind of break it down to find out like how much having superheroes exist in your world, like how much that affects like even everyday aspects you wouldn't think it would affect, But regardless, so it was that, and obviously she found herself in it being like, I'm tired of other people's shit. Everyone telling you it's like, oh, they have the answer, when in fact they don't. No one's got it figured out, me myself included. Even as a hero, I'm standing here just as confused as the rest of you. But it doesn't stop there, because when she finds out the truth about everything, it's like nothing about her. And that for her, it's like, that's why I have this identity crisis, because I literally don't know who I am, because every aspect of my life has been tailored by you. The fact of the matter is, you made the choice to get me injected with this compound V, made me into a freak. It's like, oh, but you were going to be extraordinary and stuff like that. But that wasn't for my sake. That was for yours, because of what this meant for you, like the prestige that it would bring to our family and stuff. And once again, it's like, it's your dream, not mine. I didn't have anything, because every aspect of her life was tailored around like, oh, her becoming extraordinary. So her mom, moved all the pieces to make it like that. And it's just kind of like your entire life has kind of been built around this whole you being a superhero thing, and that and that on top of it find out like, oh, the whole superhero thing isn't what you thought it would be, that it's actually super shitty. Like, that just adds a whole complicated thing. Like I said, I really appreciate what Maeve did though, because obviously Maeve was a little cynical every time she'd run into her, kind of make remarks and stuff like that. But I like that story that Annie had told to Maeve of like, oh yeah, I read your autobiography, the whole you stopping that bus to the point you broke your arm, but you went to the physical therapy with all those kids because you wanted to show it wasn't just them being heroes, but it was you. But then she was like, yeah, that was most likely something written by like someone in the marketing team. But later on, Maeve is like, no, like that was true. Once upon a time I was like you, until, I kept giving a little more and a little more and a little more away until there was nothing left. And now I am the way I am. You have to be you. So you just got to be like this optimistic, plucky asshole, superhero. Then be that, because there's already one me around. We don't need another kind of like pessimistic about the whole superhero world of like, oh, it's all shit, what's the point type of thing, And well, since I brought it up earlier, let's talk about Homelander's complicated relationship with Madeline. Like, for the beginning, I was like, oh, the way he was always jealous of the baby and stuff. I'm like, you have a thing for her. You want her time to be spent with you and not the baby. Is that what that is? It seemed like he was, like I said, he was borderline obsessed. But now we kind of find out later on the whole thing of like, oh, he kind of didn't have a mother in his life. So Madeline kind of filled that role, like his need for a mother figure in his life. She kind of plays that role as a mother figure that also, mentor, but I think also kind of lover type of thing, because it adds his whole upbringing made him, I guess, a sexually confused situation, because like to the point Madeline kind of like puts him in her lap like a baby, has her shirt opened up, like kind of has him near her boob, and then she sticks her fingers in his mouth, and it's like, what the hell am I watching? Like I said, I love that this went from just being a revenge story, which, like I said, it stayed, but also the whole conspiracy of like, oh yeah, not only are they actually making superheroes and they're making it seem like, oh no, these kids, God's blessings made these superheroes into superheroes, that they were chosen by God. But it's like, no, they were chosen by scientists because they were experiments. But on top of that, it turns out they're also making villains. They're basically turning terrorists. That's what, Kimiko's whole situation is. Basically, her parents got killed. Her and her brother got recruited into this army and kind of forced to fight for them. And that's the whole point. They wanted to turn enemy combatants into supervillains, so that the heroes can, it's like, oh, the army can't handle these supervillains. The only person they can rely on are these superheroes. I'm like, that's some twisted stuff. You're literally creating enemies for you to fight just so you can get your way with the whole situation. Because at first it turns into this whole thing of like, okay, who knew what when? Because like the way like you have Homelander kind of pointing certain things out. Like for example, the whole plane thing with the dude that was blackmailing Madeline. I thought like, oh, Madeline ordered him to do that. Apparently not. He did that all on his own because like I said, he was spying on her. I was like, I would have expected her to kind of order you to have done that, but it's like, no. Once again, because of his whole complicated relationship and wanting to please her in whatever manner, he was willing to do whatever it took to please her. So there's that, but then there's like the villain that pops up later on that kind of motivates the army to kind of push it through to like, hey, let superheroes join the national. I thought like that was Madeline, but the way the conversation comes up later on, Madeline finds out that it was actually Homelander that was responsible. You're like, wait, what? It's like, wait, so you were, because at first it seems like, okay, like I said, moments make it seem like maybe he didn't know everything that was going on. I mean, to be fair, little by little you kind of see that Homelander's literally at the heart of everything, and whether everyone else is in the middle of it, it doesn't seem like it, because the only ones that's among the seven, at least that we're aware of, that's neck deep in all of this is A-Train and Homelander, because it didn't seem like Maeve knew anything. Whether Translucent knew anything, it seems like he might have, because before he died, he ended up being like, oh no, I can rat them out. I know so much stuff about them and stuff like that. There's some like super dark stuff, so I'm assuming that might be some of the stuff. But Black Noir, not really sure what he knew. I like that fight he had with Kimiko. She really messed him up. Granted, he messed her up too. I was like, did she die? I was like, I wasn't expecting it. Oh, and she came back alive. So she has a crazy healing factor as well. It's like, holy crap. Like, and he sliced into her hard too. And it's like, what is her situation? What are her powers exactly? I was like, or is it supposed to represent she kind of more like a 9 lives cat type of thing? Like, it seemed like it was straight up regeneration. It seemed like maybe, I mean, it still could be, a 9 lives type of situation, regardless. Because she has like the claws like a cat and whatnot, like the way she kind of rips through people like that. So that's what I assume. But she also seems to be like super fast too at moments, because when Black Noir was going after Frenchie, like she kind of popped out of nowhere. She kind of super dashed and like, dashed and like tackled into him. And then there's the way she like popped out of nowhere and took down A-Train, like kind of hitting him with like a something to kind of like break his leg. So I also like the fact is that obviously because revenge is the big motivator, just how much you're willing to give up because of revenge. Like the fact is, like Susan was like, hey, I can help you with every other demand that you want, Butcher, except the Homelander situation. And he walks away from it, lying to Frenchie and MM being like, yo, she wouldn't take the deal. But, MM figures it out later on. He's like, she was going to give you everything except for Homelander. Your obsession with that became the most important thing to him. And I thought it was kind of interesting. I was like, oh, maybe at the last second he'll change his mind. No. Even at the very end, he stuck to his guns, and ended up going full-blown revenge of like, who cares about Huey, who cares about MM, who cares about Kimiko, about Frenchie, whatever friends, who needs him. Fact of the matter is he was keeping his promise to Mallory, but also to himself and to Becca. It's a whole thing. Like I said, I thought it was kind of neat because for Huey, even earlier on, it had kind of faded from him, the need for revenge. The more time he spent with Annie, kind of saw like, hey, not all superheroes are as bad. Like the fact of the matter is spending time with her kind of pulled him back from his incessant need for revenge, even to the point he stopped seeing, Robin kind of haunting him. I think that was more so him, because seeing her was supposed to, I guess, remind him, kind of reinvigorate that revenge, that burning flame in his heart, but kind of letting go, I think, was what that was kind of represent. Like, oh, because he even says that later on, it's like, you saved me. She's like, what, by just bowling? It's like, that's not saving someone. That's just me being there for you, I didn't talk about it, but also like A-Train being the dick that he was. Well, first and foremost, like him joking with another superhero in that little secret club, him literally laughing about the fact that he killed Robin. It's like, oh yeah, I ran through that bitch, and it's just like, Jesus, dude. Like, no wonder, like you expect him later on, because once again, I brought it up earlier, like the whole like, oh, he blames Huey, because it's like, yeah, I'm the one that ended up ultimately killing Pop Claw, but she was only in that position because you put her in that position. It's like, no, you did. Like, you and your Compound V, your incessant need not to make your relationship public, once again kind of showing like, yeah, there's so much politics behind just being a superhero. I was actually shocked later on when we see him on crutches, I'm like, oh wow, he must not have a Flash thing where he has like a high like healing factor. It's like it seems like it would well, he has a fast one, but probably not that fast. It would have taken like 6 or so weeks to recover naturally, but he got back on Compound V, which we obviously hear some of the negative side effects because he takes it the most. And so even his brother was like, nah, man, I'm done with it. If you're not going to stop this, I'm not going to watch you kill yourself, which it does ultimately end up basically killing him at the end, which I thought that was pretty dope, like the fight between him and Annie. I like that Annie kind of ended up saving them at the end. I love like when they gave Huey the gun and he's firing. He's like, I'm sorry, because he doesn't want to kill anybody. But even firing like crazy, he still managed to take some people down. Luckily, they were able to save Kimiko. Because I love that conversation too. Because like, you know, Frenchie's asking like, why didn't you tell us that you had a daughter? And it's like, well, for him, it's like he wants his legacy to be at the very least he did something good. Because he's kind of done a lot of bad, and he wants her to kind of be the good. She makes him better. And, you know, you even have Frenchie kind of being like, well, yeah, I kind of understand it because I'm kind of the same way because Kimiko made him better. Like I said, just his whole, you know, approach to everything. You know, it seems like she kind of got him caring about something, and it seems like he might not have been the most caring person prior to really meeting her. So I thought that was kind of neat. I also love the whole thing of like, yeah, I love Frenchie being like, oh yeah, you getting captured is like the most useless thing ever. I've never had anyone do something so useless for me. It touches me. He's like, yeah, I got my retainer here, and they're trying to pull it out, but it's not working. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna knock that bitch out. And he's like, no, you don't have to do. He's like, okay, on the count of 3, bam, got it. It's like, good, yeah, we got it. Yeah, he's like, yeah, I'm good. I love that. But nevertheless, Annie showing up to help Huey and the boys, just because it's like, hey, you're right, I am a fucking hero, so it's time for me to do my thing. But her fighting A-Train, once again, I like fast stuff. Like, I didn't talk about it, but like him racing against Shockwave was actually pretty dope, just because it's like one lap, and it's just kind of like a boom. And then it's like, all right, we got to slow it down. Who won? A-Train did. I thought, I like that. I was kind of wondering, it's like, are you going to do like multiple laps? Is it going to be kind of like a NASCAR thing? It's like, no, it's like one lap. Who can cross the line first? And I guess because that way you can kind of get a real good representation of who's fast, but still. And him kind of dodging on the light and stuff like that. But fortunately, because all that Compound V, his heart gave out. And Huey couldn't let him die. It's like, jeez. And she's like, you do know that if you help him, he's still never going to give up on coming after you. He's like, I know, but I can't let him die. Because a lot of his anger towards the whole Robin situation, because even he's been like, it's a mistake. It's like, yeah, it was a mistake, but you were acting like such a cocky douchebag about it. Like, the fact is, he ran into him at one point, like after they were at Pop Claw's place. And even at that point, he was like, wait, haven't we met before? It's like, you don't remember me. It's like, that's how little Robin meant to you. So obviously that's just going to ignite the flames even more, you know? So it's not just on Huey. It's your whole mentality, your need to be the best, to be on top. The fact of the matter is, he wants to make it seem like, oh, you put me in this position. You put yourself in that position, kind of getting caught up in all the nastiness of everything. It's interesting, too, like, just because he was only in one episode, they kept referencing a Mr. Edgar. Turns out he's played by Giancarlo Esposito, one Gus Fring from Breaking Bad. He's also in a TV show called Jet on Cinemax currently. I just thought that was kind of interesting. Oh, I wasn't expecting it. I saw him from behind. I was like, is that Giancarlo Esposito? Totally is. Okay, that's dope. Because it turns out all their plans ended up working out. There was that senator or whatever dude that they blackmailed. There's a girl, I don't know which gender she is naturally. Well, because when she was like messing with him, obviously she turned into a dude, but I guess maybe Doppelganger's just naturally a dude. Whatever the case may be. That was kind of a crazy situation. And it's like, oh, and he's blindfolded. He's like, oh, it feels different. And Doppelganger just messing with him by using a female voice to make it sound like, oh no, we're still in this. I'm like, wow, whoa. A very messed up way to go about using your powers to kind of get what you want in that situation. I also like, too, how it represents itself by being like, kind of like, you can hear like, literally her whole body has to change when she's shifting genders, which makes sense, especially because she has to go from like a very petite woman to like a very like burly dude. I was so curious about that whole situation with Homelander, when he does that, like, oh, it's almost kind of like an MTV Cribs. It's more like, oh, look at my home and stuff like that. It's like these beautiful memories and stuff like that. And you get the messed up thing of like literally everything in the house is fake. I'm like, oh my God, Jesus, that's what? That's crazy. Why would you even do that? But to be fair, it's like, hey, to kind of make their heroes more relatable, kind of ground them to be like, hey, they're just like us. They have powers, but they had people that they loved and cared about too. They had a family. They had a life like everyone else. And then he got pissed off about the blanket. I'm like, what's a blanket so important? It's like, it's literally the one thing in that house that wasn't fake. That's what pissed him off, because in a house of fake things, there's the one thing that really was his that he holds and cherishes because of some of his earliest memories. Was that blanket. Pisses him off. Then there's the whole conversation with the doctor who basically helped raise him and make him the way he is. That was kind of an interesting conversation. Interesting enough, that actor, Carmine Falcone in Gotham. Once again, just like there's like a lot of actors that have association with comic book stuff in this, and I'm just kind of like, oh, it's always interesting how it works out like that. And I don't know why. I always just kind of note it and think it's kind of interesting. Nevertheless, I like it later on when like it's like, well, Madeline and Homelander kind of do their thing, and it's like, once again, it's a weird thing because it's almost like this weird mother-son sex relationship, even though they're not related, but it's still, they kind of have that twisted relationship, because even later on, it's like, Mallory was like, yeah, they kind of have that relationship that you can't really quantify. It's like, that's one way to phrase that. But then there's the whole thing of like, okay, don't lie to me anymore. She's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, what happened to, she's like, I just want to protect you because there was a miscarriage. And I'm like, oh. I was like, because I caught it too. And he did, like, Homelander caught it too. Because the doctor had said, like, the baby was born and that Becca had died from it. Which, interesting enough, it's like, oh yeah, she was pregnant with a super baby, which it seems like that's a very rare thing. I'm wondering, was it specifically Homelander in general that couldn't have kids, or just supers in general? It's like maybe the injection makes it so that having kids is impossible, but nature found its way. And then there's the whole thing of like, oh, like he could, like there's a whole Madeline situation. He's like, oh, here's this baby, it's so important to you, because even at one point he referred to the baby as kind of an accessory, because it's like, oh, here you are trying to play the role of a strong single mother, kind of saying that baby doesn't mean as much to you. It's just the kind of almost like a photo op essentially, which kind of wouldn't put it past Madeline just because of the way she is. She's just kind of an evil business lady, kind of doing whatever she can, to better her job, better her position. That whole 82 situation, I'm assuming, like, obviously that's kind of like the amongst the company, it's like, oh, that's the top floor where all the, like, the real powerful people exist, so. But that scene at the end was brutal, where it's like, okay, he whispers the truth. I'm like, okay, so are we, as the audience, not going to find out the truth? Obviously, we find out the truth later on, but still, I was like, are we not going to know? And she's like, oh, I'm so sorry for lying to you. And it's like, because the whole point is like, okay, she's important to you. She's covered in bombs. Like, even, I'm going to use her as your weakness. At one point in time, she would have, until he got the truth. And so it's like, I'm not going to be concerned about you anymore because you've lied to me so many times. And so he proceeds to melt her face, in particular her eyes, with his heat vision. And it's like, oh my God. Once again, this show is just gnarly with its violence. And then it turns into the whole thing of like, okay, what leverage do you have on me now? It's like, oh, well, and he blows the place up. Let's not forget that baby was still there, which is like, I guess, who cares about that baby? Not unless in that moment he got, because Homelander got himself as well as Butcher, maybe potentially the baby too. Maybe he didn't care enough to get the baby out, which is like, they just kind of gloss over that, so I don't know. But then we find out, oh no, Becca's alive, the baby survived because the baby's actually an 8-year-old kid now. So it's like, wait, what? So what's going on here? And it's like, oh, I'm your dad, and you have, which is kind of sad because everything Butcher has been fighting for this entire time. It's like, no, Becca was alive the entire time. I'm assuming it's a situation of she couldn't let anyone find out, because if she even let Butcher know, it would have meant that somehow maybe it would have gotten out that Homelander knew. But I guess that's what because it seems like everyone was in on it. The doctor, so was Madeline, because even she admits it at the end. It's like, yes, I love you very much, but I'm scared of you. Everyone was scared of him because of what he's capable of doing. Even the doctor was like, I'm sorry that I made you the way you are. Like, you should have grown up with loving parents instead of a cold lab where you grew up at, because you not having a mother led to you basically being super aggressive, downright hateful, and we kind of see that. I mean, we don't know about his early days, but if it's any indication by who he is now, maybe that kind of plays a role. Maybe them kind of setting him up to be such a valuable asset and stuff like that, and kind of kneeling to his demands. I mean, to be fair, there's not really anyone around that can stop him. So, kind of, which is that, because he kind of makes it clear early on when he's like, why are we following anyone's orders? We kind of do what they say. We're the ones with the powers. We're kind of the gods in this situation. That should have already been a sign of like, yeah, we're definitely going down a slippery slope with him later on like we do, so. But like I said, I guess Becca knew what kind of person he was, and so did, Madeline and the doctor. So it's like, no. We need to keep your son away from his dad, because if Homelander is any indication of how he turned out, the last thing we want is him to turn his son into that too. The last thing we need is two of them floating around. So I think that was a justification for that. Once again, not telling Butcher just because it's like we can't take any chances that someone else would find out through him. But it's almost like I said, almost everything he's done, his need for revenge, all of it was kind of for naught, because she's alive in the end. So even kind of casting his friends aside, which the boys aren't going to appreciate that later on, because it's like, yo, we were supposed to be a team and you left us. You were so intent on revenge. Oh, but the person you care about is still alive, So, I mean, granted, that might, he makes a point to be like, oh, we are a family. Homelander does. So I think it's a situation of like, he's not going to do anything to Becca because that's his child's mom. So now what that means for Butcher, I doubt he's going to do anything to it. But I think the whole point was to bring him there to break his heart, to know like, oh, everything you've done, yeah, it's all been for naught because she's alive. You thought I did something to her. Oh, you were sadly mistaken. I kind of figured earlier enough, because like he had brought it to her attention, like Madeline's. I was like, oh, it was Madeline that actually did something to her. I'm like, but why? I mean, because I figured, I was like, well, it probably had to be to protect he's your number one asset. So, of course, you got to protect the image of your hero, telling him, like, to be a good person. Even the whole, like, him bringing down a plane, it's like, you should have let me handle that. It's like, because you were supposed to be the symbol of hope. You're a good guy. You're not supposed to go out for vengeance type of thing. So I was actually kind of shocked that they ended the season the way they did, because I kind of expected everything to kind of be like a full-blown, like, battle between like the boys and like the seven, or the remaining seven. I thought it was gonna be something like that. I was actually kind of surprised about what they did with Annie's story, making it so like she kind of had a change of heart, because she recognized like, yeah, what Huey kind of got involved in, using her to be a part of all of this, for his revenge against A-Train and everything, sure, but even, it was kind of like a lose-lose side, because it's like, well, everything Huey's associated with, yes, it's about bringing down this corruption and stuff like that, but at the same time, it was out for revenge. But at the same time, it's not like the Seven and Vought are that good. They're just kind of manipulative people, so it's kind of the damned if you do, damned if you don't type of situation. But she chose her side, and I think that's just for the first time, that's probably one of the first decisions that's kind of been her own, and I think that in itself kind of represents a big step. So obviously, A-Train saw her to be this traitor, so it's like, in the future, will he come back to be like, oh, she's a traitor, like how is that going to be dealt with, especially because she went through a lot of trouble to help you. She might even know, she might not bring up the fact that Huey was there to kind of keep him alive too. We'll see about that. Also, like I said, like, where do the other heroes fall? Because Black Noir, he only seemed like he was going along with A-Train, because it's like, oh, well, I don't know if he was neck deep in all of this too, with Homelander and A-Train with the whole Compound V thing, or was it just a situation of like, being told these are bad people, let's hunt them down type of thing. I'm curious. But I'm curious, like, where Maeve stands deep. Like I said, he's off dealing with his own situation, but where they stand in the grand scheme of things, I think Maeve is just kind of like go with the motions of everything. Like I said, because she went to her ex trying to talk to her, but because she kind of pushes her ex away, because it's the whole thing of like, oh, they're your weakness, and she couldn't even bring herself to ask people for help. There was even that thing where it's like, oh, A-Train's saying this, thing about his family and stuff, about his dad and his mom, how she died or whatever, and they're like, let's kind of keep this more upbeat. It's like, you're telling him how to tell his story. Okay, that was just kind of interesting. The Boys has been renewed for a second season already, which I'm glad. I'm so curious to see where they take us going forward. Like I said, ending off with such a note, because there's so many, like obviously, like, you know, obviously everyone got away, but obviously they're being hunted by everyone. They're kind of wanted, which is interesting, because obviously, like, everyone at Vought is going to want them. Also, like, there's a whole thing of like, well, because Vought kind of put them as like enemy number one, like government agencies are after them. They're not going to get support for like the CIA or Susan because her hands are tied. Sadly, his whole situation with his family is going to be complicated because his wife, well, ex or whatever their situation is, like, Monica doesn't want to have anything to do with him because he did all this behind her back. What this means for his daughter, like, obviously they're going to be under police protection. I think even under these circumstances, that includes like Huey's dad and whatnot. So I think that's still there potentially, but still. Then there's a whole thing about, like, you know, will the boys ever get powers too? Is one of, well, I mean, with the exception of Kimiko, who already has them, but like, because obviously we see that it can happen in adults. Granted, it's not the best option because the whole thing is it's better when you're young. I didn't even talk about it, but I really love that hospital scene where he grabs the baby and he's even telling the baby, "You better be good because if I come back and find out you were bad, I'm gonna stomp you." But at one point, the baby's laser beams has stopped, and he kind of shakes it a little bit like it's a toy or something, and then like, and you know, so it's like, oh man, this is so damn good. But nevertheless, you know, so I'm curious to see where all this, like I said, you know, will they get powers? Will they stay non-super people? Like, you need powers to kind of compete against superheroes, not unless you find another way around it. Not unless you get heroes on your side, you know, what that means for everything. Like I said, them potentially still being wanted. Let's also not forget, you know, Madeline is dead now, so I'm assuming that's going to be Homelander kind of running things potentially. What does that mean? Because obviously Mr. Edgar had reached out and been like, "Oh, Madeline, you get the promotion," but now that she's gone, it's someone else going to fill that role. Like, it's someone replacing her in that role of like the promotion she got or the position she was originally in. Like, what does that all mean? Because obviously it's an explosion, so I'm sure like there's no remains to kind of prove like what exactly happened to Madeline. So I'm also curious like what other superheroes we're going to get introduced to. Like, once again, like where the deep story is going to take us. We're going to learn anything about Black Noir because he was just like the silent badass the entire season. So also find out the truth about the whole Becca situation and her and Homelander's child. I guess that's what she was sitting at the bench for, because she was trying to contemplate, like, okay, what do I do? Who do I tell? That type of situation. Maybe she felt bad. Maybe, you know, because he tries to twist it around to be like, oh, she had a crush on me type of thing, but it doesn't mean he still didn't force himself on her. So maybe it's like a thing of like, you know, sadly, maybe she felt shame and she didn't want to turn to her husband for help, whatever the case may be. Mallory says she wanted to have nothing to do with this, but does that mean she is completely done? Will they go to her for help? Is that actually where the boys are going to go next? Back to her for help potentially after everything, or not? Because she'll probably be more likely to help the boys rather than you know, specifically Butcher, but we'll see. And we also know supervillains were created this season as well, so I'd love to see the continuation of that, because the way Homelander was kind of putting it, it's like, no, we created quite a few, so that's definitely going to play an interesting role going forward as well. So I'm very excited to see what they ultimately end up doing with Season 2. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, love life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.